There are invisible forces that steal our lives silently. They are not ghosts or demons, but thoughts that repeat the same things, bonds that drain the soul, routines that extinguish the inner fire. This book is not a recipe, nor a straight path. It is an open map for those who feel something inside them is silently dying. Here you will not find formulas, but rather naked truths, words that may hurt, but also awaken. If you are reading this, perhaps you have already begun to awaken. And that, although it may not seem so, is the beginning of freedom. Chapter 1. The Price of Pleasing. There's a prison that has no bars, no guards, no walls. No one forces you to enter, and yet millions have lived there for as long as they can remember. It's called the need for approval. From a young age, we're taught to smile even if we don't feel like it, to say thank you, even if we're not grateful, to act as expected even if it betrays who we are. And so, without realizing it, we build a borrowed self. One that fits, that doesn't bother us, that is applauded. But at what price? The need to please is one of the most subtle forms of self-abandonment. It disguises itself as kindness, goodness, and politeness. But deep down, it's fear. Fear of being rejected, fear of not belonging, fear of being alone with ourselves. And that fear drains vital energy. It tires us out. It breaks us. We say yes when we mean no. We smile when we're sad. We fake enthusiasm when everything inside feels dry. And each of these gestures, however small it may seem, drains our essence. It distances us from our truth and turns us into a friendly but absent shadow. Where does this need come from? Perhaps from an absent father or a demanding mother, perhaps from a childhood in which we learned that love is earned by doing the right thing, not simply by being. We learned that we will only be valued if we don't bother others, if we don't fail, if we aren't too intense, sensitive, or weird. So we learned to edit who we are, to amputate parts of our souls to fit molds made by others. And the more we perfect that adapted self, the more we are applauded, but the less we recognize ourselves. And here's the catch: the more we try to please everyone, the more we lose ourselves. Because you're never going to be enough for everyone, and you're never going to be truly loved if all you're showing is a plastered version of yourself. Pleasing is a silent pact with invisibility. And don't get me wrong, it's not about becoming selfish or insensitive. Loving isn't always giving in. Respecting others isn't betraying yourself. Being kind doesn't mean becoming an emotional servant. There's a difference between giving from love and giving from fear. The former expands you, the latter exhausts you. And if after giving you feel empty, exhausted, resentful, then you didn't give. You sold out. One of the clearest signs that you're stuck in this trap is when you start to disconnect from your own needs. You no longer know if you're hungry, if you're tired, if you really want to be there, or if you're just there so they don't think badly of you. You ask yourself, is it okay for me to say no? Will they be upset if I leave early? Will they think I'm cold if I don't respond right away? And each of these doubts pushes you a little further away from your center, until one day you realize you've been living for years based on others. And the worst part is that, despite all your efforts, you don't feel loved. You feel used, because approval isn't love. It's a transaction. Act as I expect, and I'll accept you in return. Breaking away from this need is an act of courage. It's looking at yourself in the mirror without disguises. It's allowing yourself to disappoint. It's accepting that you're going to be misunderstood, judged, rejected, and still remaining true to yourself. It's walking alone for a while. Because yes, when you stop pleasing, some people walk away. But don't be mistaken. You're not losing people. You're losing the illusion that they loved you for who you are. And that, although it hurts, is a relief. Stopping pleasing doesn't mean stopping loving. It means loving with your roots. It means choosing yourself without guilt. It means stopping mortgaging your soul for a handful of applause. An authentic life isn't always comfortable, but it's real. And reality has a distinct energy. It doesn't drain, it doesn't tire, it nourishes, it breathes, it vibrates. When you start living from who you are and not from what others expect of you, something changes. Your body relaxes. Your voice becomes firm. Your decisions are no longer born of fear, but of conviction. You begin to attract healthier relationships, cleaner ones, because you're no longer negotiating your worth. You're no longer putting on a disguise to be chosen. And that's when something magical happens. Someone, right in the middle of the road, sees you. For real. Not your mask. Not your persona. You. And that look changes everything. You don't need anyone's approval to be you. What you need is the courage to bear the fact that not everyone will understand you, and that's okay. You didn't come into this world to be universally accepted. You came to be deeply you. So the next time you feel that urge to please, to say yes, to keep quiet about what hurts so as not to upset others, stop. Breathe. Ask yourself, am I acting from love or fear? And if it's from fear, choose differently. Even if your voice trembles, even if it hurts, even if they don't understand. Because every time you choose your truth, even in a small gesture, you are recovering a piece of your soul. And that's the real way back home. We continue moving forward, but first, if you feel that this connects with you, in the description, you have the first link with more material on metaphysics that you will love. Chapter 2, The Trap of Urgency. There's a prison that doesn't need bars or grills, but that locks up millions, constant urgency. We live trapped in a frenetic dance, answering emails, solving pending issues, paying bills, rushing toward a place we can never define. We wake up with our hearts already on alert, as if life were a series of fires to put out before breakfast. But what is urgent is not always what is important. The trap is in the feeling. The adrenaline rush of having something to accomplish gives us a false sense of purpose. We rush because we believe it makes us valuable, necessary, useful. And without realizing it, we put on hold what is essential: inner silence, true affection, deep rest, the art of doing nothing. The urgent steals energy because it has no soul. On the other hand, what is important demands presence, depth, reflection. But what is important is silent. It doesn't shout. It doesn't send notifications. It doesn't threaten with due dates. What is important is like a flower in the middle of the forest. Only those who walk slowly and are willing to look see it. How many times have you put off a heartfelt conversation to answer an email? How many times have you sacrificed sleep to accomplish a task that won't be meaningful tomorrow? How many times have you ignored your body, your mind, or your heart just to meet someone else's expectations? And so, day after day, we allow the urgent to consume us. The paradox is this: the urgent is rarely what gives meaning to our existence, but it presents itself with such force that we end up believing it indispensable. Meanwhile, the important, which could transform us, withers away, waiting for our attention. We live programmed to react: a message, a call, an alarm. Every sound interrupts the sacred thread of thought. We no longer think, we simply respond. We no longer choose, we simply obey the pressure of the moment. But life is not meant to be lived in a hurry. Stopping is a revolutionary act. Breathing with intention is a rebellion against global anxiety. Saying "this can wait" is a declaration of freedom. When we learn to differentiate between what is urgent and what is important, we begin to recover an energy that previously escaped through 1,000 invisible cracks. And it's not about becoming irresponsible or abandoning our tasks. It's about order. It's about knowing that not everything deserves immediate attention, that some things can wait, and others should never have been on our agenda. Energy drains when the soul has no space to express itself, and the soul needs time. It needs slowness, depth, sustained attention. What's important, what's truly important, is built slowly. Like a garden, like a friendship, like oneself. The urgent wants you to be efficient, the important wants you to be wise. Sometimes we confuse speed with progress. But moving isn't always progress. You can run in circles for years, exhausted and empty, without having taken a single step toward your essence. Instead, a moment of clarity can be worth more than 1,000 days of struggle. Therefore, the great challenge isn't doing more, it's doing what matters, and doing it with conscience. An ancient master said, if you're in a hurry, walk slowly, because haste is the enemy of discernment. And only with discernment can you recognize what deserves your energy and what is just noise disguised as necessity. Imagine each day as a jug filled with pure water. That water is your life energy. You can pour it into 1,000 tiny cracks, responding to every message, saying yes to everything, extinguishing other people's fires. Or you can pour it into what truly nourishes your soul, creating, loving, resting, reflecting, connecting. The urgent wants us to be distracted. The important wants us to be focused. And in that choice, our inner freedom is at stake. Observe your day. Do it without judgment, just with curiosity. What are you giving your energy to? What things are stealing your time, peace, and clarity without giving you anything in return? What should you put off without guilt? What should you honor more? Because if you don't prioritize what's important, what's urgent will prioritize it for you. And there's nothing sadder than reaching the end of the day or of life and realizing you've been busy, but not present. Active, but not alive, full of empty accomplishments and unrelated goals. Urgency is a shadow that feeds on your fear of stopping, but on the other side of that fear lies calm. And from that calm, the most powerful decision is made, to regain control of your attention. Because where your attention goes, your energy goes, and where your energy goes, your life flourishes. Chapter 3. The Thirst for Approval, the Other Mirror. There's a poison that disguises itself as flattery, a trap as soft as the voice of someone who tells you, "I'm proud of you." It's an invisible hook that plunges into the depths of your soul and teaches you without words that you're only as valuable as someone else confirms it. Thus begins the most subtle slavery, that of living under the eyes of others. From a young age, we learn to seek approval like someone begging for water in the desert, a nod of approval from an adult, a high grade, a satisfied look, and we feel that we exist, that we are valid. And then, without realizing it, we begin to build our identity based on others. Being valuable because people applaud you, being worthy because they accept you, being proper because you're not annoying. It is a prison that smells of expensive perfume. The thirst for approval isn't presented as a desperate need, but as an elegant way of belonging. We seek to fit in, to appear correct, to look like we're right. But in that quest, we begin to betray ourselves. We begin to shrink to fit into molds that never belonged to us. How many times have you kept your truth to yourself for fear of disappointing others? How many times have you said yes when you wanted to shout no? How many times have you laughed at something you didn't find funny, just so you wouldn't be seen as the weird one? How many decisions have you made with a heavy heart just because someone else expected it of you? To live to please is to die little by little. It's like walking across a stage, dressed in a suit you didn't choose, repeating lines you didn't write just because the audience, that faceless mass, might applaud or might boo. And the fear of rejection becomes stronger than the desire to be yourself. The problem is that applause is never enough, because when you live off the approval of others, your self-esteem is like a leaf in the wind. If they love you, you shine. If they criticize you, you crumble. If they look at you, you exist. If they ignore you, you disappear. And deep down, you know no one can sustain that forever. The constant search for approval turns us into slaves to masks. We change faces depending on the environment, one for work, another for family, another for social media. We become experts at editing, at filtering who we are to show only what is expected. But every filter is a renunciation. Every mask carries weight. What would happen if one day you decided to show yourself without embellishments? What would happen if you dared to be yourself, even if not everyone approves? Perhaps it would hurt at first. You would lose some applause, some followers, some friendships built on false foundations. But you would gain something much deeper, the peace of living honestly within yourself. Being yourself, authentic, imperfect, vulnerable, is a revolutionary act in a world that rewards appearances. There's a big difference between connecting and pleasing. Pleasing is acting to maintain external peace. Connecting is living from inner peace. When you connect with yourself, you discover you don't need to convince anyone. You just need to listen to yourself, be true to yourself, and respect yourself. And yes, of course, external recognition can be sweet. We all enjoy being seen, celebrated, embraced. It's not about denying it, but the difference is not depending on it to live. You are worthy even if no one applauds you. You are valuable even if no one says so. You are enough even if the world turns its back on you. A life based on the approval of others is a puppet hanging by strings. And those strings are often in the hands of people who don't know your dreams, your wounds, or your true story. Are you going to leave your life in the hands of those who don't understand it? Freedom begins the day you stop needing external validation to feel complete. It's the moment you choose to look in the mirror and recognize yourself, not by what others see, but by who you know you are. It's when you can say to yourself, "I'm proud of myself, even if no one else says so." It's not about being arrogant, it's about recovering your inner voice, the one that was silenced by years of complacency, fear, and duty, the one that whispers uncomfortable but necessary truths. When you act from that voice, you may lose some applause, but you also stop dancing for it. And then the impossible happens. The right people start to approach you, not because of the mask, but because of the truth. And your relationships become more sincere, more human, more real. The thirst for approval isn't quenched by indifference, it's healed by authenticity. Because when you show yourself as you are, with your strengths and weaknesses, your mistakes and your successes, you discover that you're not alone. That there are others who have also felt that pressure to fit in, that tiredness of pretending, that desire to break the mold. And in that shared authenticity, true connection is born. And don't live to be approved, live to be true. Even if your voice trembles, even if not everyone understands you, even if you walk alone for a while. Better to be rejected for who you are than accepted for who you pretend to be. What truly matters will never require you to betray yourself to belong. Chapter 4. The noise that prevents you from thinking. There is a violence that leaves no marks on the skin, but slowly wears down the soul. Constant noise. We're not just talking about the bustle of the city, or the traffic that deafens the streets, or even the screams of others that echo through the walls. We're talking about the other, more dangerous, more subtle noise, the one that lives within, that murmur that never stops even when we're silent. That inner chatter that analyzes, judges, anticipates, complains, dramatizes. That voice that doesn't allow us to fully inhabit the moment because it's too busy building futures that may never arrive or reliving pasts that no longer exist. That voice that not only comments but conditions, that not only narrates but distorts. We live in a world saturated with information, images, stimuli, and artificial urgencies. But beyond that, the most disturbing thing is how this external noise has infiltrated our minds. The noise of comparison, of constant judgment, of having to achieve, of having to prove ourselves. We live as if someone were always watching us from the outside, demanding performance, perfection, an edited version of ourselves. And we don't realize that this is robbing us of the most valuable thing, inner clarity. When everything is noise, there's no room for intuition. When everything is urgent, there's no room for truth. Wisdom, that serene voice that sometimes barely whispers, needs silence to emerge. But how can it speak when an army of thoughts interrupts it every second? Sometimes your mind becomes like a city with too many red lights. Everything is at a standstill, but the horns keep honking. We think we need answers, but in reality we need silence. Not an empty silence, not the absence of sound, but a fertile silence. A silence that cleanses the inner space. A silence that is more presence than absence. Because only in that state is it possible to clearly see what is draining us, what is wearing us down, what doesn't belong to us. Inner noise is clever. It disguises itself as worry, productivity, and efficiency. It makes us believe we're moving forward when in reality we're going in circles. It convinces us that thinking more means solving more. But most of the time, thinking more is just procrastinating. Learning to silence yourself internally is an art. And like all art, it requires practice, humility, and a profound determination. At first, silence is uncomfortable. When we turn off the noise, things we had hidden beneath emerge. Fears, emotions, old wounds. Silence is a mirror, and we don't always like what it reflects. But it is only by crossing that threshold that we can reach authentic clarity. Not an artificial peace, but a serenity that doesn't depend on external things. Many fear being alone with their thoughts, but they don't realize that they are not their thoughts. They are the space where thoughts occur. They are the sky, not the clouds. The observer, not the storm. And when you manage to see that, something inside you is unleashed. as if you suddenly stopped fighting against the current and simply floated. It's not about stopping thinking, but rather choosing not to identify with every thought that appears, observing them like someone watching leaves fall from a tree, some beautiful, others rotten, but all fleeting. Who would you be if the noise were turned off? What decisions would you make if you could truly hear yourself? What dreams would awaken if the mental chatter didn't bury them under excuses and fear? Silencing the noise isn't isolating yourself from the world. It's inhabiting it with a different frequency. It's learning to be present even in the chaos. It's consciously choosing which thoughts you want to live in, because every thought is a house and some are in ruins. Noise at its core is fear in disguise, fear of not having control, fear of facing what's essential. But life doesn't need to be controlled, it needs to be inhabited. And only when we silence the unnecessary do we hear what's necessary. Some people think they need more time, but what they really need is more silence. Not hours, but full moments. Not days of rest, but minutes of presence. Noise convinces us that life is always somewhere else. Silence reminds us that life is happening right now. As you breathe, as you read this, as you wonder if it all makes sense. And yes, it does, because every word spoken from silence carries within it a seed of truth, and you are ready to sow it. You may not be able to control the noise of the world, but you can learn to not reproduce it inside you. You can choose to lower the volume, make space, and stop. The mind trained in noise seeks constant stimulation, but the soul cries out for pause. And in that pause, the transformation begins. Chapter 5. The Invisible Chains, Who Drains Your Energy. Each of us carries a burden, often invisible, but heavy. It's not just daily responsibilities or external obligations. It's the invisible chains that bind us, that drain our energy, and that, without us realizing it, shape our existence. They are those people, situations, and thoughts that, like parasites, consume us without giving anything in return. It's easy to point out the obvious: exhausting work, lack of rest, constant overload. But the real energy drain often comes from less tangible, more subtle, more human places. From those interactions that leave us drained without fully understanding why. From those bonds that call to us but demand more than we're willing to give. Energy in its purest form is the very essence of life. It is the vibration that drives us to move, to create, to love, to be. And when it is spent without being renewed, it becomes an empty echo, a weariness that knows no rest. Have you ever felt that after being with a certain person you feel smaller, emptier? That, without knowing how, a conversation turns into a silent battle, where you end up ceding emotional ground. That's no coincidence. It's the subtle dynamic of energy consumption, an unequal relationship where one gives and the other only takes. It's not just the easily recognizable toxic people, those who criticize, manipulate, and drain us openly, but also those others, the seemingly harmless ones, the needy ones, those who always come looking for comfort, support, and attention without considering your space. The paradox is that often those who consume us the most are those we love the most, or those we believe need our help. This wear and tear is a gradual disappearance, a silent escape that wears us down soundlessly, that distances us from ourselves without us even realizing it. And it's not just external. Energy thieves also live in our minds. Their self-critical thoughts, the shoulds, the I'm not enough, the unrealistic expectations we impose on ourselves. It's self-demand that turns into punishment, guilt that won't let go, perfectionism disguised as discipline. Recognizing these thieves is the first step to reclaiming what is ours. But it's not enough to identify them. We need to learn to set boundaries, to know when to say no, to understand that our energy is a sacred resource, not an inexhaustible fund to satisfy other people's demands. Saying no isn't selfish, it's an act of self-love, of respect for our integrity. Every forced yes is a yes we steal from our well-being. Every excessive effort is a burden that doesn't belong to us, and that, in the long run, drags us down. The problem is that we live in a culture that glorifies total availability, that rewards the ability to give without pause, that confuses value with usefulness. We're expected to be always present, always willing, always sacrificing, and so little by little we become shadows of our former selves. Exhausted, disoriented. But energy isn't just physical, it's emotional, mental, spiritual. When we let ourselves be consumed, we don't just lose strength, we lose connection with our essence. We forget who we really are and settle for surviving in the mold others designed for us. Reclaiming that energy is an act of rebellion against invisibility, against apathy, against silent exhaustion. It's choosing to live with intention, with presence, with clear boundaries. Every time you step away from what drains you, you're saying yes to yourself. Every time you cultivate spaces where you can recharge, you're building an inner refuge that no one can invade without permission. It's not an easy path. The fear of losing relationships, the guilt of not being enough, social pressure, everything conspires to keep us tied down. But the question is, at what cost? Is it worth burning yourself to illuminate the lives of others, if you yourself remain in the dark? What's the point of giving so much if you forget about yourself in the process? The answer lies in measure, in balance, in learning to discern who deserves your energy and who doesn't, in understanding that true generosity isn't giving until you're exhausted, but giving from abundance, from fullness. The challenge lies in setting boundaries without fear, without guilt, with love and respect for yourself and others. It's about recognizing that taking care of yourself doesn't mean giving up on others, but rather being in a better position to be with them. It's an art, a learning process, a constant practice. But the reward is immense, recovering your power, your strength, your presence, reconnecting with your essence, living from a place of authenticity and renewed energy. So today, look around and inside. Ask yourself, what or who is draining my energy? Where do I set boundaries? Where do I need to be kinder to myself? Remember, your energy is your most precious possession. Protect it, nurture it, respect it. Only then will you be able to shine with your own light without depending on the reflection that others send back to you. Chapter 6. The Subtle Art of Retreat. How to reclaim your power by turning off the noise. In today's society, constant connection has become a requirement presented as a virtue. We are always within everyone's reach, available to respond, to assist, to explain, to justify. But what happens when you decide to withdraw? When you choose not to respond instantly, not to foster a dialogue that doesn't add value, not to shed your energy on other people's drama or constant expectations? Retreat isn't running away or hiding. It isn't a lack of commitment or indifference. Instead, it's a conscious act of preservation, a gesture of self-love that defies the logic of immediacy and saturation. It's the space you create for yourself amidst chaos, a deep respite that allows you to reconnect with your center. Few understand that real power lies not in the quantity of presence, but in its quality. It's not always being available that generates respect or admiration, but the ability to be there when it matters fully, without exhaustion, without fragmentation. This power comes from mastery over your own energy, from the wisdom to know when to be there and when to withdraw. Withdrawing is like turning off a light in a room filled with visual noise. It not only reduces the chaos, but also invites reflection and reorganization. The silence your absence creates has a magnetic force. Without saying a word, without justifying yourself, you make others stop, notice you, and value you. This strategy isn't manipulation or games. It's a profound manifestation of emotional sovereignty. It's the recognition that your energy isn't an inexhaustible resource or a public good. It's the clear boundary you define so others respect your living space. But retreating also involves facing discomfort. Often, inner silence stirs up long-ignored emotions: fear of abandonment, insecurity, loneliness. The absence of external noise can intensify the internal dialogue, forcing you to confront what you've been putting off. This confrontation is an opportunity for growth, to learn that being alone isn't empty, but full of possibilities. That chosen solitude is the fertile ground for cultivating authenticity. That in silence, you can hear the most important voice, your own. We often confuse noise with life. We think that being busy, responding quickly, and filling time with stimulation are synonymous with being alive and valuable. But true vitality is born from balance, from the space between words, from the respite between actions. The mastery of conscious withdrawal is a learning process revealed in small daily decisions. Leaving your phone in another room, not responding to an urgent text, not getting into an unproductive argument, turning off notifications. These are simple but powerful acts that rebuild your relationship with time and energy. When you learn to say no without guilt, to disappear without drama, to reserve your energy for what truly matters, you begin to change the dynamics of your relationships. What once seemed like indifference becomes respect. What was once expectation transforms into admiration. This change isn't always welcome. When someone is used to your constant availability, your withdrawal can feel like a betrayal or abandonment. But it's precisely this discomfort that signals that you've broken a toxic pattern of emotional or energetic dependence. The key is to remember that no one has the right to consume your energy without your consent. That your absence isn't a punishment, but an invitation to value and respect your space. That true love doesn't require constant presence or endless sacrifices, but authenticity and reciprocity. So the next time you feel the pressure to always be there, to respond immediately, to justify your silences, stop, breathe. Ask yourself, is this necessary for my well-being? Am I giving out of abundance or out of obligation? What do I really need right now? Cultivating the art of retreat is in essence a revolutionary act in a world that celebrates hyperconnectivity and total availability. It is a call to revalue the power of silence, pause, and conscious absence. Because in that space created by your choice, true power emerges, the ability to choose how, when, and with whom you share your energy. That is the sovereignty that transforms not only your life, but also the way you relate to the world. Don't underestimate the power of an act as simple as not responding. Don't fear the emptiness your silence creates. In that pause, in that absence, you are reclaiming what belongs to you, your space, your time, your power. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you that if what you're seeing resonates with you, you'll find much more material to continue learning in the first link in the description. Chapter 7: The Invisible Border. Learning to say no to protect your energy. In the vast territory of our emotional and mental life, there exists a subtle boundary, invisible to many, but essential to preserving our integrity: the ability to say no. It is not a simple verbal act, but a profound act of self-recognition, of respect for the space that belongs to us, and for the energy that sustains us. Saying no is much more than a word. It's a boundary that defines who you are and how far you're willing to go. It's an act of courage in a society that rewards constant yes, unlimited availability, and unreserved commitment. In a world that demands that we always respond, always help, and be present without conditions, saying no is a small revolution. Why is it so hard to say no? Because at its core, no challenges other people's expectations, confronts the other's needs, and often stirs up uncomfortable feelings: guilt, fear of rejection, anxiety about losing belonging. We've been taught that being good means always being accessible, that loving means sacrificing without measure, that personal worth is measured by the number of favors we can offer. But this teaching is a trap that leads us to silent erosion, invisible wear, and self-abandonment. Because every imposed yes is a yes that steals our inner space, an act of self-abandon disguised as generosity. No, on the other hand, is the most authentic affirmation of self-love. It's the gesture that gives us back authority over our energy and our time. By saying no, we not only protect our well-being, we also teach others how we want to be treated. This act creates a boundary that not only defines but also invites respect. It sends a clear message: I matter. My energy matters. My time is valuable. And while that boundary may provoke external resistance, it is the only one that guarantees the preservation of our core. The difficulty in setting boundaries often stems from a deep fear of loneliness, disapproval, and rejection. But true loneliness arises not from the absence of others, but from the absence of oneself. When we constantly give in, when we accept without question, we lose ourselves in the crowd. We stop recognizing ourselves, and consequently, we become exposed to dissatisfaction and resentment. Saying no is also an act of emotional honesty. It allows us to live coherently and with integrity, It frees us from the weight of the silent lie we construct when we accept what we don't want, when we give more than we can or desire. Furthermore, saying no doesn't mean closing doors forever or becoming inaccessible or cold. Rather, it's a balancing act that allows us to choose when and how to be present, and when to reserve ourselves for self-care and renewal. Learning to say no is a path that requires practice and patience. It's not easy to break deep-rooted patterns or challenge social expectations. But every time we say no consciously, respectfully, and without guilt, we strengthen our ability to be in the world from an authentic and fulfilling place. It's also important to recognize that no can be kind and compassionate. It's not necessary to be harsh or aggressive to protect yourself. On the contrary, a tender and clear no can strengthen relationships and open spaces for mutual understanding. For those accustomed to constant availability, no may sound strange or even threatening, but that discomfort is an indication that we are moving toward a healthier relationship with ourselves and others. Ultimately, protecting our energy through no is an act of love that benefits both the person saying it and the person receiving it. Because when we take care of ourselves, when we respect our boundaries, we can offer our presence with greater quality, with greater authenticity, and without wear and tear. So today, when faced with any demand, listen to your inner voice. Ask yourself, is this yes coming from my abundance or from obligation? Am I willing to give this energy, or do I need to reserve it for myself? What part of myself am I willing to preserve by saying no? Remember that every well-placed no is a yes to your well-being, to your essence, to your life. Protecting your energy isn't an act of selfishness, but the foundation for living a fulfilling life. Because only from a protected space where energy flows in balance can we truly find ourselves, grow, and contribute from our authenticity. Chapter 8. The Approval Trap. Breaking free from the constant desire to be accepted. In our quest to belong, to be seen and valued, we often surrender the most valuable of our energies, the need for approval. This deep, natural and human desire can become an invisible trap that drains our vitality, fragments our authenticity, and perpetuates a cycle of emotional exhaustion. From an early age, we learn to look externally to validate who we are. Did I do well? Do they like me? Do they accept me? These questions shape our behaviors, gestures, and words, adjusting our essence to the expectations of others. Without realizing it, we begin to build a version of ourselves that seeks to please, avoid conflict, and gain acceptance, sacrificing the freedom to simply be who we are. This pattern has a profound cost. The energy we expend in the constant search for approval is stolen from the space we could use to nourish our own being. Every gesture, every imposed yes, every awkward silence meant to avoid displeasing represents a small surrender of our integrity. Beyond the emotional drain, this dynamic also affects the quality of our relationships. When connections are based on the need to be accepted, they become fragile and conditional. Authentic presence is obscured by the mask of pleasantness, and sincere vulnerability is replaced by the act of pleasantness. Freedom and authenticity begin when we stop looking outside for what can only be born within: self-acceptance. This is a difficult path because it involves facing the fear of rejection, loneliness, and uncertainty. But it is also the only path to genuine and sustainable energy. When we learn to validate our internal experience, to honor our feelings and boundaries without relying on external judgment, our energy stabilizes. We no longer live based on the reflection others send back to us, but from a place of coherence and inner strength. Freeing yourself from the constant desire for approval doesn't mean becoming numb or indifferent. It means consciously choosing which voices to heed and which to let go. It means discerning when a criticism or comment can be an opportunity for growth, and when it's simply noise that distracts our attention and drains our energy. This process also invites us to recognize the projections others place on us. Often, those who seek approval are responding to other people's expectations, family conditioning, or cultural influences. By being unaware of this, we fall into the trap of feeding these projections, reinforcing patterns that distance us from our essence. Setting clear boundaries in this dynamic is essential. We can't control how others perceive us, but we can decide what we allow and what we reject. This conscious decision gives us back control over our energy and removes us from the wear and tear that constant complacency generates. When we free ourselves from the need for approval, we become beacons of authenticity. Our presence is not a search for reflection, but an affirmation of being. The energy we emanate becomes attractive because it is rooted in truth, not adaptation. It's also important to understand that this liberation is a process, not an event. There will be moments of doubt, setbacks, and fear. But every small step towards self-acceptance strengthens our ability to protect our energy and build relationships based on truth and mutual respect. Finally, the invitation is clear. Observe how many times a day you seek approval or avoid conflict for fear of losing acceptance. Ask yourself what part of yourself you are sacrificing in those moments, and feel free to tell yourself that you deserve to be loved and respected just as you are, without the need for filters or masks. Because when you free yourself from the constant desire for approval, you regain an energy that belongs to you, a life force that can only spring from self-love and inner truth. Chapter 9. The Art of Pausing. How silence preserves your energy and reveals your power. In a world that never stops speaking, acting, and demanding attention, pausing emerges as a subversive and radical act. Stopping, breathing, and remaining silent isn't simply the absence of sound or movement. It's a profound strategy for preserving energy, reconnecting with oneself, and reconfiguring the relationships around us. Pause is a space between stimulus and reaction, a respite between external noise and the internal storm. In this space lies the power of conscious choice, the ability to avoid being swept away by the inertia of impulses or the urge to respond. When we learn to pause, we stop the constant drain of our energy, because every automatic reaction, every impulsive response, is a small drain of life force, an invisible but real drain that leaves us exhausted. Pause, on the other hand, becomes a refuge where our energy is collected, centered, and strengthened. This act of pausing also protects us from manipulative dynamics and unconsciously giving in to patterns that don't serve us. In the pause, the impulse to be provoked loses its strength, the need to please or defend lessens, and the ability to respond from authenticity rather than reactivity emerges. Pause is also a silent language that communicates without words. When we momentarily withdraw from dialogue, when we leave a message without an immediate response, or simply choose silence amidst the noise, we create a space that compels reflection, generates discomfort, and paradoxically, commands respect. This silence isn't a strategy of manipulation or a power play, but an act of presence. It's a way of saying, I'm here, but from a place where I take care of my energy, where I don't get caught up in the urgency of the world. Learning to pause requires a profound recognition of our worth and vulnerability, because it's not always easy to resist social pressure, expectations, or the fear of judgment. The culture of doing, responding quickly, and always being available pushes us to ignore this essential need. However, in the pause, the true nature of personal power is revealed. A power that doesn't shout or dominate, but radiates calm and firmness. A power that doesn't depend on external approval or constant validation, but springs from the core of our being. Furthermore, pausing offers us a mirror in which to look at our own shadow, the fears, insecurities, and wounds that often trigger our automatic reactions. By stopping, we can observe these aspects without judgment, understand their origins, and consciously choose not to let them govern our actions. This process of introspection that arises during the pause is transformative. It invites us to cultivate patience, empathy toward ourselves, and the ability to sustain uncertainty without falling into emotional chaos. In practical terms, a pause can be a moment of respite before responding to a message, a moment of silence during a tense conversation, or the decision not to intervene in an argument where emotional strain is certain. It's not a renunciation or an evasion, but an act of wisdom that protects our integrity. When we practice pausing, we begin to notice changes in our relationships. People feel that space and often respond with greater respect and consideration. The dynamic balances because we stop feeding the cycle of demand and reaction. It's true that the pause can generate discomfort, even rejection, in those accustomed to our constant availability. But that discomfort is a sign that we are challenging patterns that no longer serve us, and that we are reclaiming our space. Finally, pause connects us with the spiritual dimension of existence. It reminds us that we are not machines producing responses or emotions, but whole beings who need rest, reflection, and renewal. This inner silence opens paths to profound wisdom, to attentive listening, and to the manifestation of a power that does not impose itself, but rather invites and transforms. So today, before you get swept away by urgency, noise, or pressure, stop, breathe, listen to the silence that dwells within you. In that pause, you reside, whole and strong. And from there, choose how you want to move in the world. Because in the art of pause, in that space between stimulus and response, lies the key to protecting your energy, affirming your power, and living with greater fulfillment and authenticity. Chapter 10. Shadows of Burnout. Recognizing and Healing. Invisible Exhaustion. Emotional burnout, that silent enemy that infiltrates our being without permission, is one of the most subtle and devastating thieves of our vital energy. It doesn't always manifest itself with visible signs, but its effect is felt in the soul as a void, a fatigue that even the longest rest seems to alleviate. This invisible exhaustion is the product of continuous surrender, blurred boundaries, and a gradual disconnection from our own essence. Many face this exhaustion without realizing it. They continue giving, responding, caring, and supporting without realizing that they are emptying themselves. The energy they offer isn't renewed, but rather diluted by the constant demands of their surroundings. And so, little by little, it becomes a shadow that weighs on their days, obscuring their vitality and joy. Recognizing this shadow is the first act of courage, because it means admitting that we can't always be available, that we are not always infinite, and that taking care of ourselves is not a selfish act, but necessary to sustain life in fullness. Invisible burnout is fueled by several sources: social pressure to always be strong, the belief that our worth depends on how much we give, the fear of rejection if we say no, and a lack of tools to set healthy boundaries. These beliefs, often unconscious, create fertile ground where burnout thrives. The body and mind begin to send signals, although we often ignore them. Fatigue that doesn't go away with sleep, scattered thoughts, increasing irritability, emotional and physical disconnection, feelings of worthlessness or hopelessness. All of these are echoes of an energy that is being relentlessly consumed. But invisible burnout doesn't just affect the individual. It has a profound impact on relationships, work, and the ability to live authentically. When we're burned out, creativity is blocked, communication becomes rigid, and presence becomes superficial. To heal this shadow, it's essential to return to our center, to the root of our energy. This requires learning to listen to what our body and soul are telling us, to respect our internal boundaries, and to say no when necessary. It's a process of emotional re-education, of unlearning constant self-demand and recognizing the need for rest and renewal. Part of this healing involves reconnecting with one's natural rhythm, with deep breathing, with inner silence. These simple yet powerful practices bring us back to earth when the storm of exhaustion threatens to sweep us away. It's also crucial to distinguish between what truly nourishes us and what consumes us, disguised as duty or responsibility. Learning to consciously choose where we invest our energy is an act of self-love and wisdom. External support can be a valuable ally on this journey. Talking to people who respect our boundaries, seeking professional or integrative help, and creating spaces for rest and recreation all contribute to rebuilding our vitality. It's important to understand that healing invisible burnout isn't a linear or quick process. There will be moments of progress and setbacks, of light and shadow, of patience and frustration. But every small gesture of self-care and respect is a victory that contributes to recovery. Finally, healing this burnout also involves transforming our relationship with the culture that glorifies exhaustion and overproduction. It involves questioning the narrative that tells us we must always be available, active, and productive to be valuable. This cultural transformation begins at the individual level, in each conscious act of caring for our energy, honoring our time, and preserving our integrity, because only from a place of balance and vitality can we offer the best of ourselves, not as a constant surrender that destroys us, but as a genuine and renewed expression. In this recognition and care for invisible wear and tear lies a profound invitation to live from plenitude, from awareness, and from self-love, protecting the primordial source of our existence, the energy that sustains us and drives us to exist. Chapter 11, The Power of Limits. Learning to say no to say yes to life. Saying no is one of the most powerful, yet most difficult acts we can perform in our lives. In a culture that celebrates constant yes, perpetual availability, and unreserved commitment, no appears as an awkward, almost taboo word associated with rejection, guilt, or loss. However, saying no is an essential act of self-love and respect for our vital energy. It marks where what we can offer ends and the sacred space that belongs only to us begins. Learning to say no doesn't mean closing doors to the world, but rather opening a window to our authenticity and well-being. No is a beacon that guides us toward a more fulfilling life because it allows us to intentionally choose where we invest our strength, our time, and our hearts. When we say no to what doesn't resonate with our truth, we say yes to what truly matters. However, this practice is difficult because it involves facing deep fears: fear of abandonment, fear of not being loved, fear of loneliness, or fear of disapproval. These fears condition us to please, to respond, to always be available, to sacrifice our rest for the approval of others. But this constant sacrifice comes at a high price. We disconnect from our center, fragment, and surrender our energy without reserve until we are exhausted. It doesn't help us stop this drain, reclaim our space, and rediscover our essence. Saying no is also an act of clear and honest communication. It means respectfully and firmly expressing what we feel and need without fear of the other person's reaction. It's not about closing in behind a wall of indifference, but rather about creating a boundary that protects our integrity. When we learn to set healthy boundaries, relationships change. Those that truly value and respect us find new, more authentic ways to connect. Those that only sought to take advantage of our availability begin to distance themselves, and that, although it sometimes hurts, is a necessary process for our growth. Limits aren't a punishment for others, but a gift for ourselves. They allow us to conserve the energy we need to live fully, to create, to love from abundance, not scarcity. This power to say no is deeply connected to the awareness of our finiteness, to the understanding that our time and energy are limited and precious resources. Every no is a yes to the life we want to build, to the peace we need, and to the respect we deserve. The difficulty lies in deprogramming old patterns that taught us that personal worth depends on the number of times we say yes. It's a learning process that requires patience, self-compassion, and constant practice. We can start by observing where we find it hardest to say no, what fears emerge, and what beliefs condition us. Ask ourselves what would happen if we truly dared to set that boundary, and what part of our lives would open up as a result. It's also important to recognize that saying no doesn't make us less valuable or less lovable. On the contrary, it allows us to be more authentic and present because we're not distracted or exhausted by commitments that aren't ours. It's not an act of inner sovereignty, a step toward personal freedom and integrity. It's the conscious choice to care for our energetic field, preserve our vibration, and honor our being. When we learn to say no without guilt or fear, we discover that we are capable of living in a more aligned, coherent, and loving way with ourselves. This learning is a path that transforms not only our relationships with others, but also our own history. It frees us from the need to seek external approval and connects us with the inner wisdom that knows when to open doors and when to close them. In practice, saying no can begin with small everyday actions, not responding immediately to a message, not accepting commitments we don't want, not giving in to demands that drain our energy. These small things are seeds that grow into a more fulfilling and balanced life. As we gain confidence in our no, we feel less need to justify ourselves or explain our decisions. Self-respect is reflected in the clarity of our language and the firmness of our boundaries. And while it may not provoke discomfort or rejection in some, it is an act of radical love for our existence. Because when we take care of our energy and our time, we can be truly available for what truly matters, for the people and projects that nourish our souls. Ultimately, no is a profound yes to life because it is a yes to fulfillment, authenticity, and inner freedom. It invites us to live from a place of being able to be, not of having to be, and to build a life where our energy is not a currency but the sacred foundation of our being. Chapter 12, The Rescue Trap, When Helping Becomes Self-Abandonment. Helping is one of the noblest expressions of being human. It's in our nature to reach out, to alleviate suffering, to be there for others in adversity. However, when the act of helping becomes a constant and limitless obligation, it can become a trap that robs us of our energy and our authenticity. The rescue trap arises when we confuse helping others with absolute responsibility for their well-being. We give ourselves to the point of sacrifice, without considering the consequences for our emotional and spiritual health. Instead of being an act of free love, helping others becomes an invisible chain that imprisons us. This pattern is deeply rooted in beliefs and emotions that we often don't fully recognize. It can stem from a fear of loneliness, a desire to be appreciated, or the belief that our worth is tied to how much we do for others. Thus, we become those who always should be there, the fixers, the ones who absorb the chaos of others to maintain calm. But this constant surrender comes at a silent cost, the progressive erosion of our vital energy. By taking on the emotional burden and problems of others, we leave little room for our own needs and for caring for our inner core. Rescue becomes a subtle form of self-abandonment. Furthermore, when we help from this place, the relational dynamic can become unequal. Those receiving help can become dependent, and we become a function rather than an authentic presence. Reciprocity is lost, and an imbalance sets in which over time can cause resentment, burnout, and disconnection. It's essential to recognize when helping is a free and conscious act, and when it has become a habit imposed by fear or internal obligation. Authentic helping is a gift born from abundance, not a debt repaid with the constant dedication of our energy. In this sense, learning to discern is an act of profound wisdom. It's not about stopping helping or being insensitive, but about establishing clear boundaries that protect our well-being. When we help with respect for ourselves, we maintain our strength and can offer true presence without getting lost in the emotional burden of others. This discernment also involves accepting that we cannot save anyone else. Each person is responsible for their own path and growth, and trying to control or fix their lives is an illusion that wears us down and creates false expectations. True help sometimes lies in allowing others to face their own difficulties, to experience their own processes without constant intervention. It means trusting in each person's capacity to learn, heal, and evolve on their own. When we learn to set healthy boundaries when helping, we discover that our energy is renewed and the quality of our presence improves. We can accompany from a place of balance without sacrifice or resentment. It's also important to recognize that self-abandonment through rescue has a profound effect on our relationship with ourselves. When we forget our needs, our identity fragments, and we lose touch with our inner truth. This phenomenon is a form of identity confusion, where the authentic self is diluted behind the role we've assumed in the lives of others. We become the person who's always there, but not necessarily who we really are. Healing this trap begins with self-awareness and compassion. It's a process of reconnecting with our needs, desires, and limits, and learning to say no without guilt or fear. Recognizing that we deserve care and respect is essential to freeing ourselves from the burden of rescue. In doing so, we make room for a more balanced and authentic life. The invitation is to reflect deeply on our motivations for helping, to ask ourselves when the act is truly a gift and when it is a way of avoiding our own emptiness or fear. This process can be painful because it involves letting go of roles, expectations, and patterns learned from childhood or culture. However, it is a necessary step toward living with integrity and fulfillment. It's also helpful to observe how we react when someone sets boundaries with us. Do we respect them, or do we feel abandoned? This reaction can reveal wounds of our own that need healing. Ultimately, freeing ourselves from the rescue trap means regaining our emotional and energetic sovereignty. It allows us to live from a place of authenticity, offering help with freedom and joy, not from obligation or sacrifice. This path is a profound act of love toward ourselves and others, because only from a place of fulfillment can we truly accompany and support those around us. Chapter 13. Silence as a Refuge, Learning to Inhabit the Inner Emptiness. In the constant noise of the world, where external and internal voices compete for attention, silence becomes a sacred, almost forbidden space. But it is in this silence that lies a deep refuge, a place where we can find ourselves without masks, without noise, without demands. Learning to inhabit silence is an invitation to stop the maelstrom of thoughts, emotions, and stimuli that drain our energy. It's an act of courage, because silence is not only the absence of sound, but a confrontation with our own essence. When we remain silent, without running away or filling the void, we begin to discover who we really are behind the voices that tell us how we should be, what we should do, how we should feel. This encounter with inner emptiness can be uncomfortable because it confronts us with fears, wounds, and shadows we've hidden beneath layers of noise and activity. However, it is also the path to healing and integration. Silence is the language of the soul, a space where we can clearly hear the wisdom that dwells within us. In it, distractions dissolve, and the truths that haste and noise obscure us emerge. It is in this silent refuge that we can cultivate mindful presence, the ability to be with ourselves without judgment, without haste, without resistance. Presence is the antidote to the energetic and emotional dispersion that characterizes our times. When we learn to sit quietly without the urgent need to act or think, we regain control over our energy. We stop giving it away to external stimuli or automatic reactions and begin to manage it with intention. This silence isn't isolation or disconnection, but a space for deep encounter. From there, we can observe our thoughts and emotions without identifying with them, understand our patterns, and consciously choose our response. In our culture, silence is often interpreted as absence, weakness, or emptiness, but it's actually a source of power. Silence is the territory where authenticity is born, where creativity awakens, and where wisdom flourishes. Living in silence is also learning to let go of control, to stop constantly seeking external answers or validation in frantic action. It's trusting that not doing is also doing, an act of care and renewal. Silence connects us with our inner time, that slow, natural rhythm we've lost in the rush and demands of life. By synchronizing with this time, our energy stabilizes and our vibration rises. However, for many, silence is unfamiliar and feared territory. The mind resists, emotions stir, and the body craves movement. This is the crucial moment when the discipline of the individual is put to the test. It's not about avoiding noise, but about learning to return to silence again and again, with patience and compassion. It's a training path that strengthens our ability to sustain stillness without losing ourselves. In this process, we can discover that silence is a teacher that reveals to us what truly matters, what is aligned with our essence, and what is merely noise that consumes our energy. Silence also invites us to observe our relationships more clearly. It allows us to identify when we are in connections that nourish us, and when we are in bonds that drain us. When we break the habit of reacting impulsively and instead respond from a place of inner silence, we transform the quality of our interactions. We become less available for pointless conflict and more present for deep dialogue. Furthermore, silence protects us from emotional and mental overstimulation, that constant bombardment that generates fatigue and internal fragmentation. It allows us to rebuild our energy and return to the world with greater strength and clarity. Therefore, cultivating silence is a radical form of self-care and self-knowledge. It's not a renunciation of the world, but a deep commitment to our integrity and well-being. This inner refuge is also a creative space where we can dream, imagine, and create without the limitations imposed by external noise or internal voices that judge us. In silence, our authentic voice finds the space to emerge, to express itself without filters or masks. We learn to distinguish between what is truly ours and what is an imposed echo. Furthermore, silence connects us with something greater than ourselves, that spiritual dimension that many traditions have pointed to as a source of peace, wisdom, and strength. By allowing ourselves to inhabit silence, we align ourselves with life from a deeper, truer place. We open ourselves to transformation and the expansion of our being. This path is not without its challenges. The fear of facing the inner emptiness can lead us to seek distractions or avoid silence at all costs. However, every time we choose silence instead of impulsive reaction, every time we sustain stillness in the face of noise, we are practicing inner freedom. Thus, silence becomes an act of sovereignty, an affirmation that our energy is not available to just anyone or anything. It is a constant reminder that our well-being is a priority. And in that conscious choice, we regain the power to decide what we give our attention, our emotion, and our presence to. Ultimately, silence is the space where we can reconcile with ourselves, where we can rediscover our truth, and where we can recover the energy that has been stolen from us. To inhabit silence is to inhabit life with greater fullness, with greater depth, and with a more authentic connection with the world and with our own being. Chapter 14. Conscious Choice: How to Protect Your Energy in a World that Consumes It. We live in a time where energy is becoming the most valuable and scarce resource. We're not just talking about physical energy, but also the emotional, mental, and spiritual energy that fuels our vitality and our ability to live authentically. In a world saturated with stimuli, demands, and relationships that constantly make demands on us, protecting that energy becomes a fundamental choice, a sacred discipline. Every day we face seemingly small decisions that shape the flow of our energy, deciding what we pay attention to, how we respond to provocations, which conversations we accept and which we avoid, become acts of self-respect or silent drains of our life force. This conscious choice to care for our energy is not an act of superficial selfishness, but a profound manifestation of self-love and emotional survival. It is an understanding that our ability to be authentic, creative, and compassionate depends on maintaining a healthy and balanced energy field. The reality is that we often give away our energy without realizing it, as if it were an inexhaustible resource. We respond instantly to messages that don't nourish us. We engage in arguments that drain us. We accept roles that diminish us, and we postpone our well-being to satisfy external expectations. This habit of automatic surrender is rooted in learned beliefs and patterns: the need to be accepted, the fear of loneliness, the desire to avoid conflict. But this excessive surrender leaves us vulnerable, exhausted, and disconnected from our essence. Protecting energy is therefore an act of discernment, knowing when to say no without guilt, when to retreat without fear, when to set clear boundaries to preserve our center. It's not about building rigid walls, but about creating a safe space where we can be ourselves without losing our strength. This conscious protection also involves recognizing the sources of energy drain, those people, situations, or habits that drain our vitality without reciprocity or respect. In practice, this may mean limiting contact with toxic or demanding relationships, avoiding excessive exposure to anxiety-inducing media, and cultivating habits that recharge our energy, such as rest, connection with nature, or inner silence. Another important dimension is managing our own emotions and thoughts, which can be internal sources of exhaustion if we don't address them carefully and consciously. Intense or unprocessed emotions, repetitive and negative thoughts, and internal judgments consume energy in a silent drain that can go unnoticed, but profoundly impacts our well-being. Therefore, conscious choice also includes cultivating self-observation and practicing presence to identify when our energy is running low and take action to rebalance it. A key element in this process is emotional discipline, the ability to not react impulsively to stimuli that cause wear and tear, but rather to respond from a place of calm and sovereignty. This discipline does not mean repressing or denying what we feel, but rather choosing how to express it and to whom we dedicate our attention and energy. Thus, protecting energy is also a form of liberation, freeing ourselves from automatic patterns that keep us in cycles of exhaustion, freeing ourselves from the constant need to please, control, or react. It's about intentionally choosing how we invest our energy so that it serves us and not others who are only looking to use it for their own purposes. In this context, the word no becomes a revolutionary act, a powerful tool to preserve our integrity and prevent the erosion of our life force. Saying no can be uncomfortable and can even generate rejection, but it is a necessary act to establish boundaries that respect our humanity and our inner resources. This conscious choice also connects us with respect for our time, that finite resource that cannot be recovered, and that must be managed with the same wisdom as our energy. By protecting our time and energy, we are laying the foundation for a more balanced, authentic, and meaningful life. Without this protection, it's easy to fall into the trap of overload, burnout, and disconnection, a path that leads to suffering and loss of meaning. In contrast, consciously choosing where and how to invest our energy empowers us to live from our center with clarity and purpose. This empowerment also allows us to cultivate healthier and more authentic relationships, because only when we are whole and balanced can we offer true presence to others. By becoming aware of how our energy moves, we begin to see patterns and dynamics that previously went unnoticed. We discover what or who truly nourishes us and what drains us. This awakening is a fundamental step in transforming our lives, as it invites us to let go of what no longer serves us and to choose more wisely. It also allows us to more clearly answer the essential question: what is worth my energy? Sometimes the answer may require acts of courage, such as walking away from relationships, jobs, or habits that consume without giving anything in return. But that act of courage is also an act of love for ourselves, a step toward regaining our personal power. The conscious choice to protect our energy is not a destination, but a journey, an ongoing process that requires attention and commitment. Along this path, we can rely on practices that help us maintain balance, such as meditation, conscious breathing, connecting with nature, and cultivating spaces of silence. These practices remind us that energy is not just something we expend, but something we can cultivate, renew, and expand. Protecting energy is ultimately an act of alignment with our truth and purpose. It's living from a place where our actions and relationships reflect our deepest selves. Thus, amidst the noise and demands of the world, we can remain steadfast and authentic, preserving our inner light to radiate it with greater strength and clarity. Every conscious choice we make to nurture our energy is a step toward a more fulfilling life, a step toward the freedom to be who we truly are without compromise or sacrifice. Because in that space, protected by our inner wisdom, we find the strength to live with integrity, to love with authenticity, and to create from the abundance of our being. Chapter 15. The Silent Revolution. Transforming your relationship with your energy to live in freedom. In a world that constantly demands our attention and energy, true revolution is not achieved through shouting or external demonstrations, but through silent, conscious actions that come from within. This revolution is the profound transformation of our relationship with the energy that inhabits us, and that inhabits us. It is the recognition that protecting, honoring, and managing our energy is the most radical act of self-love and resistance to the culture of burnout. The silent revolution begins with a simple but powerful question: what am I giving my energy to? That question encapsulates the entire path to personal sovereignty and authenticity. Because energy is the channel through which our life circulates, it is the raw material of our thoughts, emotions, decisions, and relationships. When we learn to be conscious guardians of that energy, we open ourselves to a freer, fuller, and truer existence. Being aware of where and how we invest our energy means fearlessly examining the habits, relationships, and beliefs we've allowed to consume us without return. It's about honestly recognizing the invisible drains that daily sap our vitality: the need to please, the fear of rejection, the urgency for external validation, the constant noise of social media, empty conversations, commitments that don't nourish the soul. This courageous approach invites us to a deep cleansing, a purification that not only clears our energetic field, but also opens space for what truly matters, for connection with ourselves, for the creativity that springs from silence, for the peace that emerges when we stop fueling internal and external conflict. But this transformation isn't a race or a goal to be achieved once and for all. It's an ongoing process, a daily practice that requires discipline, patience, and compassion. Discipline to set clear and firm boundaries, patience to learn to listen to the signals from our body and mind, compassion to not judge ourselves when we fall into old patterns or give in to overload. The silent revolution also leads us to understand that energy is not a fixed resource, but a dynamic flow that can be depleted or renewed depending on how we cultivate it. Therefore, an essential part of this transformation is the sacred act of self-care, understood not as a luxury, but as a basic necessity to maintain the integrity of our energy field. Caring for our energy involves creating rituals that reconnect us with our essence, that allow us to recharge and expand our inner light. It can be as simple as dedicating time to conscious breathing, contemplating nature, introspective writing, or creating art that springs from the heart. These are spaces where we allow our mind to quiet and our soul to breathe, where energy moves effortlessly and without wear and tear. By transforming our relationship with energy, we also transform our relationships with others. We learn to offer from a place of plenitude, not a place of lack, to give without losing ourselves, to love without sacrifice. This new way of relating challenges traditional dynamics based on dependency, expectation, and control, opening the way for authentic connections that respect individuality and personal space. In this shift, silence and pause become powerful allies. Silence the inner voice that demands perfection or approval. Pause before reacting. Allow the space to be filled with stillness instead of noise. In that silence, we discover the power of non-reaction, the power of being without doing, the power of simply being. The silent revolution is also an invitation to let go of the myth of burnout as a symbol of productivity or value. Today's culture glorifies being always on, always available, as if our worth depended on the amount of energy we give. But that logic is a trap that leads to burnout, disconnection, and a loss of meaning. In contrast, choosing to protect our energy is to reclaim our humanity with its limits, rhythms, and needs. It is to recognize that we are integral beings where body, mind, and spirit form an inseparable whole that deserves care and respect. This act of conscious rebellion frees us from the slavery of constant doing and opens the door to a more harmonious and creative existence. When we stop seeing energy as something to be spent uncontrollably and begin to see it as a treasure to be safeguarded, a profound transformation occurs that touches every aspect of our lives. Well-managed energy gives us back the power to choose, to say no without guilt, to prioritize what nourishes us, to reclaim the time we thought was lost. It gives us back the clarity to discern between what is urgent and what is important, between what demands our reaction and what deserves our calm. This silent revolution not only changes our personal lives, but also has a resonant effect on the world around us. When we live from the integrity of our energy, we radiate a calm strength that inspires others to do the same. An invisible but powerful movement of collective transformation is created, beginning within each of us. Ultimately, protecting our energy is an act of liberation. It's about freeing ourselves from the programming that keeps us enslaved by external expectations, toxic relationships, and destructive habits. It's about freeing ourselves from the illusion that our worth depends on what we do or give. It's about freeing ourselves to simply be who we are, with all our imperfections, vulnerabilities, and greatness. This path to energetic sovereignty invites us to reconnect with our deepest essence, to listen to the voice of our soul that guides us toward authenticity and fulfillment. It invites us to choose with intention, to live with purpose, and to walk lightly, aware that each step is an opportunity to rediscover our truth. The silent revolution is, therefore, the great adventure of the inner life. It is the transformation that occurs when we decide to stop wasting our energy on what doesn't serve us and begin investing it in what truly matters: our peace, our growth, and our connection with life. May this call resonate in every word, every pause, every breath. May it inspire us to choose with courage, to care with tenderness, and to live with the serene strength of those who have discovered the infinite power of protecting their own energy. Because at the end of the day, the most authentic freedom is that which is born from the balance between giving and receiving, between being and being, between sustaining oneself and opening oneself to the world without losing one's essence. And that freedom, that silent revolution, begins now in this moment with the conscious choice to honor and protect the energy that makes us live. Thank you for reading this far. If this metaphysical content has made you reflect or opened new perspectives, don't stop now. In the first link in the description, you have access to much more material to continue growing, learning, and applying it in your life. See you in the next video, but remember, your transformation begins when you take action.